Welcome to another conversation in People in Fundraising. This podcast features interviews with nonprofit professionals who discuss their career journeys, lessons learned, and enthusiasm for working in fundraising. And here is your host, the founder of People in Fundraising, Tim Wilson.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another conversation in the People in Fundraising podcast series, where I interview nonprofit leaders who work in development at institutions across the world. And today I am really excited to welcome Ambareen Naqvi to People in Fundraising. Good afternoon, Ambareen.
Good afternoon. Thanks, Tim. It's great to be here. And as you know, I'm Senior Director of Development in the East Coast area, which kind of actually means also Central Coast, for Central and the Midwestern states as well, at RAND Corporation.
Awesome. Yeah, and when I got connected to you, it was through a mutual former colleague of both of us, Ron Bembry. And as I was like, hey, Ron, I'm just trying to see, I asked other guests, who else might be interested. And he's like, oh, you should talk to Ambareen. And when I saw that you worked at RAND, the history major or the history geek in me was like, I know RAND. Like, it started after World War II, and it's expanded into a massive global policy think tank and research institute. So I'm very interested to hear your role there. We'll get into that in a moment. Working in development for RAND.
RAND's been great. I mean, as you mentioned, we have locations. I mean, we're headquartered in Santa Monica, but we have a large office in DC, in Pittsburgh, a small one in Boston. We have one in Australia, in Brussels, and one in Cambridge in UK as well.
Oh, wow. So truly a global reach.
Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah, because I think when I thought of RAND, I thought it's kind of a US based, but it's international. So terrific. So Ambareen, thank you for that little bio sketch there. As I always do with each guest, we begin the Q&A by asking you to please share how you entered the development world with our audience, please.
Yeah. When I was a child, I think from as far back as I can remember, I always wanted to help people. And I thought I was going to do that by being a doctor. And so I started off as a bio major, actually even finished as bio major in college, but realized pretty quickly that I didn't really want to be practicing as a doctor every day. And so what I wanted to do was help people in some way. And so when I graduated, I started applying to nonprofits, including Columbia, and wanted to move back. I was in Baltimore at that time and wanted to move back. I grew up in New Jersey, and so wanted to move back to the Mid-Atlantic states. And Columbia was a great opportunity for me, and it just worked out great. I actually applied as a researcher because that's the strength of my university, Johns Hopkins, is research. And so I thought that would be the job that I would get, but I actually applied for that, and events officer and alumni development. Both were in alumni development, actually. Got the event officer position, which I am very grateful for, because it led me to where I am now. And I still am in touch. And, my first supervisor, Ilene Markay-Hallack, did wonders for bringing me out of my shell. And we're still friends, and she's still my mentor. So.
Oh, dynamite.
Wonderful. And then, really the reason I want to help people. My parents brought me as I'm from Pakistan, was born in, and when I was 6 years old, we came from there to here. And the main reason was education. My dad wanted to educate us here. The schools were closing down there at times, and such. And so really that's why being at Columbia was so important to me, because education's been a huge part of my life and has had a huge emphasis from my parents my whole life. And I agree, and so really what I was seeing, then what I saw at Columbia and doing events for alumni as well as development was learn a little bit about alumni relations and development. And it really led me to realize that development had such a major impact, even though when coming from Pakistan, we don't talk about money a lot. And so that was
Okay.
hard for me when I first started my first development position. After I left Columbia, I was there for over 6 years and got my master's there. I decided, okay, it's time to kind of move on. I started at UCLA later the next year, actually. And that's where I started my first development position. And UCLA was amazing. It was a great opportunity to start as a young fundraiser because they have a great training program, I have to say, and specifically UCLA College. And they were just the perfect place to start that off with. And I really realized what an impact I could make in fundraising, right? And there, I used to work for the UCLA College, the undergrad division, and it was unique in that it really was all about making sure that the academic and student life, much more the academic piece of the students, was well taken care of. And so we used to do scholarship for undergrads, including first generation, as well as under-resourced, the low and middle income students, a lot. And so, and worked with donors that didn't necessarily, usually self-made, a lot of them, and didn't necessarily think of themselves as very wealthy, didn't live like that. Very different from the New York world, interestingly. And so, but I just I love the work. I think my skills were a good match for it. And so continued that. I came back to Columbia. I wanted to be close to family. And my alma mater had a position open, SIPA, the School of International and Public Affairs. It so happened. And so I started, I was director of development there. That's where Ron and I worked together. And loved doing that for about 4 years. And then, we'll talk a little bit about RAND, but basically really the way I think about my career and where I want to be is I really look at the mission of each organization. And I want to make sure that it aligns with my beliefs. And so RAND does so perfectly. And so that's why now I started there about a year and a half ago as senior director of development there.
Oh, excellent. Awesome. Yeah, I was curious how long you've been at RAND. So
yeah.
Nice.
It's been a great opportunity, I have to say. It's my first nonprofit world kind of position where it's not just higher ed nonprofits, but beyond that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for sharing that career journey with us. I'm curious, Ambareen, in terms of your role at RAND as a senior director of development, what can you tell us about initiatives? You mentioned sort of the regional coverage. Just curious, what your role focuses on in support of RAND on the development.
Right. I mean, as you mentioned, RAND started off as basically a defense contractor, and it expanded and became in 1948 its own nonprofit called the Project RAND. The name actually comes from research and development, which I always think is interesting.
Yes,
And basically the roots of it came, what it is currently, the roots came out of Cold War, where we started really doing research, not only in terms of the military and how it could be helpful to them, but other parts of the government as well, economically, socially, and political affairs as well. And so now what RAND does is basically research in every area that you can think of. And the idea is to really, it's a nonpartisan, objective, evidence-based research organization. And the idea is really to inform policymakers with this objective as much as possible, and evidence-based research from both sides of the aisle, so that way we can be as effective as possible. And I think that's what's really unique about RAND is that not only are we, because I think when people think of RAND, they might think of it as a think tank. And most think tanks are partisan, and that is not what RAND is. And so we're very unique in that. And we really are heard by both sides of the aisle. That's what I think is so amazing. And that's what I love about RAND, and that's why I'm interested in contributing to its mission, is because, as I mentioned, I was trained as a scientist, as biology, and so evidence and research mean a lot to me. And
Yeah.
so that's why it perfectly aligns with my mission. You know, our campaign currently actually ends today, September 30th, which we will surpass the $400 million goal. The name of our campaign is Tomorrow Demands Today. And the idea has been to really fundraise for a variety, like 5 major, I would say, things. And so one is elevating our graduate school, which has only done PhDs in the past and now is doing also masters in national security.
Interesting.
When our new president came in, he came in from the Biden administration and said, look, we really need RAND trained minds in the government. And so that makes perfect sense. And people can come and get a master's degree much quickly than they can a PhD. And so we started that and has just expanded that into our DC campus as well. So not just Santa Monica. So we're starting to expand that small, as well as, so we still have a higher ed component to this. So that's been nice for me.
Yeah, sure.
Transition. The other things that we're very much, you know, that we're emphasizing in terms of our campaign, because we do so much, I think we need to kind of narrow some of that focus. So Jason Anthony, our president, said basically countering autocracy. So truth decay, addressing misinformation, disinformation, as well as understanding China and other autocracies and such. We were kind of key in solving the Cold War, as I understand it. And so we want to have a large set of experts that can be helpful for China as well. And then reducing inequity, of course, is a huge part of what we do in our social and economic division as well. And in there's something, there's gun policy in America as well. And we'll talk about that in a minute, because I've worked really closely with them and since I started here, as well as health. RAND's analyzed a lot of things that have happened during COVID and what could policymakers do better the next time a pandemic comes around, or any public health issue, basically, as well. And I think another piece that isn't necessarily part of our campaign, but is really important to us, is AI, because that's really starting to, and regulating AI, particularly bioweapons. And so thinking about the viruses that can really kill a few hundred, that could, through AI, be changed to then kill millions potentially. And so regulating that, not just in the US, but around the world, is something that we focus on as well. But AI in a lot of different ways, not just through bioweapons, but how can that affect the workforce, education? We have a large education and labor department as well, division. And then the other piece is energy and climate solutions. And so we have a new center in that. And just thinking about not only is climate changing, but what can we do and help policymakers think through decisions of what will be an issue and how can you hopefully, you know, not necessarily fix it, but at least address it. At this point. So the one piece that I did want to go through a little bit more is the Gun Policy in America initiative. I think it really focuses, it's something, like I said, I've worked on, and I think it showcases how RAND can make a change in something that is a very partisan topic, but in a way that is not partisan. And so, our GPIA, as we call it, Gun Policy in America initiative, started off from something that was internally initiated and funded because our president at that time, Michael D. Ridge, really believed in it. And of course, it is a very important topic, I think, as we see, you know, at least every few months, if not daily. And so one of the things that RAND researchers have successfully done is testified in state legislatures such as Washington, as well as with police as well, Washington, Tennessee, and Pennsylvania, to help create child access prevention laws and really effectively reduce youth firearm suicides, reduce unintentional injury, as well as homicides. And so one of the first gifts that I worked on. One of our former board members, Jerry Greenwald, called us and said, I'm interested in helping, reduce gun deaths. And so we started from there and really landed with, he spoke with our co-directors at GPIA, Andrew Morrell and Rosanna Smart, and it's created a chair, the Greenwald Family Chair in Gun Policy.
Oh, wow.
And he saw how effective we are in terms of being able to talk to the states where really a lot of the policy is being created in terms of gun control or gun. I don't know if gun control is the right word. I'm probably not using that correctly. That's probably not neutral, but in terms of gun policy. And so, Andrew Morrell was chosen as the Greenwald Family Chair in Gun Policy at RAND. And so that was just wonderful to work on that gift with Jerry and Andrew and Rosanna and showcase how effective RAND can be, because I think it's hard sometimes to really showcase the effect of our research. But we can say that we know this many researchers or this many downloads, this many things, but it's hard to say. Nobody's going to say, very few people say, I'm not going to say nobody, but I think few people will give credit to RAND saying that this is the reason we made this law. But actually, in terms of the child access prevention laws, we can actually say that it was due to RAND research. And our researchers, honestly, I think you're going to give a quote that will work really well with this, but our researchers are actually very humble in that way, where we're not sure if our work really contributed. Maybe it contributed to this, but did it really make the difference? We don't know. And so, but they're amazing people, great colleagues to work with. And that was a wonderful kind of experience to start off with at RAND.
That is a fascinating anecdote. Thank you for sharing that. And you've been at RAND for about a year and a half, and so to start off with that funding is fantastic. And Ambareen just mentioned I was going to read a quote, and so I'll do that now. It's a quote from best-selling author and journalist Malcolm Gladwell, Tipping Point, and lots of other books. He has a new one coming out, if it's not already out yet. But he spoke about RAND, and it's on the RAND website. And Malcolm Gladwell says, quote, I am convinced that RAND has more fascinating people doing fascinating research per square inch than any other institution in the country. And that speaks volumes, to come from him. And I also think, as you mentioned earlier, a lot of, and RAND started out as a think tank, policy defense contractor, and a lot of other think tanks are hyper partisan or partisan, and they haven't been around as long as RAND has either. So, the groundbreaking research is still going on, and it comes with the backing of 75 years and more being a leading institution. So that in itself, I think, as an outsider, I'm like, I imagine that helps to open doors at state legislatures and other venues where it's like one side is really set in a certain opinion, but you're coming with what the researchers at RAND are coming with actual facts and evidence. That is like...
Exactly. And I think, they recognize that we are not partisan. And so they're more open-minded about our research as well. And that's why we are very careful to not have any conflicts of interest. Mostly our clients, as we call them, are government at this point, if not actually all within the US now, is really basically different levels of government. So whether it's state, city, federal, that's really a lot of the research that we're working on. And of course, with our mission, it makes a lot of sense in terms of affecting policy. And so, and one of the things, so Malcolm Gladwell is actually a former trustee of ours. And so he's seen up close what RAND does. And so it's really wonderful to have a great quote like that from him. I think, and it's kind of funny because just a week or so ago, I was doing a visit with one of our donors who was on one of our boards previously. And he mentioned also, he said that, what's really unique about RAND is the people. That he said, not only do you guys have brilliant researchers actually doing the work, but they're also incredibly down to earth and humble.
Awesome.
And so it's been, and he's right, honestly, I have to say that. And so it's really wonderful to be recognized as such, I think, with RAND. I think one of the challenges I see, I actually work remotely in the New York metro area.
Okay.
And we obviously have an office in DC, but we don't have necessarily an office here. I think, here in New York, Council of Foreign Relations and such are known more better than RAND is. And so that's kind of one of the challenges. And for me, in terms of this area, where obviously there's a lot of wealth and a lot of philanthropists in New York, but they're not always aware of what RAND has done. And if they are, they think about us as an organization that does military research mostly,
Sure.
or national security research, which of course we do and are still great at, but I have no idea about any of that. I don't have a classified clearance or anything, but the work obviously that we fundraise for is public. And the other piece that actually I did not mention for RAND is that one of the requirements, if it's not a qualified product that we're working on research, we do demand that from our clients that it be public. And so everything is posted on our website. All the research that we do. So it not only helps the person that funded, the organization that funded at the government level that did, but also anyone that's interested.
Yeah.
And so not only does it help policymakers, but it also helps nonprofits and others in the area that are looking to make a difference.
Sure.
And don't necessarily have the funds to do research in those areas, but can take our research and apply it. And so social service organizations, often we partner with them as well, or sometimes we'll do evaluations of work as well, and to be as effective as possible. Everything is public otherwise. So,
and I think that is fascinating that it's publicly available. And I think, from being in the interviewer's seat, I also imagine that the full transparency of having everything public is also important.
Yes. And I think that's what really makes us rigorous and very much wanting to be very objective and accurate as much as possible. It also demands it, because when everything is public, you have to be able to say, this is how we did this. This is what the results were. Have everything. You have to have, I guess now, as everybody calls it, the receipts, right? And sort of and such. So, so there's nothing happening at RAND that's not classified, that is behind the scenes. All of the work that I work on, and I think a good chunk, I can't say how much percentage because I don't know, but is public. And
awesome.
And in fact, schools use it. I think some of our board members, when I asked them, and donors, when I asked them how did they find out about RANDs, one of them responded that his mom used to give him when he was a teenager in high school. She would read RAND papers and she would give it to him on subjects that he was interested in.
Wow.
And so that's how he was introduced to it. Yeah, exactly. Which I thought was like the most amazing thing. I was like, wow, I want to be like that, Mom. So
it's amazing.
It's a great organization, I have to say. Yeah,
that's awesome.
I'm very happy here.
Oh, good. I have a quick follow-up. I imagine that as you were going through the hiring interviewing process at RAND, they mentioned that they were in a campaign. Is that so? Did that have a sway for you as you were considering and you were assessing your organizational fit, opportunity for your career?
Yeah, I think, for me, I've always worked in an organization that was in a campaign. Very few, or maybe I've worked past a campaign or so, but usually when I started, it was during a campaign. I think, organizations tend to put more resources behind, obviously, frontline fundraisers specifically. and in alumni development and advancement world, in our worlds, when there is a campaign or they're getting ready for a campaign. And so the fact that this was kind of the last push was really attractive to me, just because I knew that we were going to get there to begin with, because we had already raised a lot. And this is one of RAND's largest, obviously, campaign, I think, as most are the most current ones. And it has, as I mentioned, been generally dependent on funding from different levels of government and as our clients, but philanthropy had never been a large part of how RAND raised revenue until now. And so until this past campaign. And it's really professionalized the advancement part, the development department, our department. It's small but mighty, and we get a lot of funding from foundations and individual donors, of course, as well, which is what I do specifically, along with several of my colleagues. Yeah.
Oh, that's fantastic. Thank you for that explanation, Ambareen. I appreciate it. And that wasn't part of the script, so I appreciate you rolling with that.
No, of course. Yeah. That's easy.
We have about 10 minutes left. I'd like to get to this last question comment here it's a quote from Frank Bruni, who writes for the New York Times. And earlier this spring, he wrote an article titled, "The most important thing I teach my students is not on the syllabus." And so I typically draw quotes from journalists and other people in news and the media to help round out these questionnaires. So I'll read some of Frank's quote. I won't read all of it, but I wondered, and you got this question ahead of time, after I'm done reading the quote, I'd love to hear what the message, how it may resonate with you in your role. So again, from Frank Bruni, he said, quote, "We all carry wounds, and some of us carry wounds much graver than others. We must confront obstacles. We must push hard at those obstacles. We mustn't lose sight of the struggle, the imperfection, and the randomness of life." And that's the end of the quote. I even think, like, of course, all of those objectives of RAND's campaign, climate change, gun policy, like, those present obstacles to society and down to, the individual. And as Frank said, like, that's part of the struggle. It's imperfect. It's random. But anything's speaking to you from what Frank Bruni wrote there, please.
So, when you sent me that, I actually read the article, the full article. I went and read, and actually, if I may, the part that actually that you didn't read actually spoke to me the most, interestingly. I'm a relatively new mom. I have a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old, and
awesome.
And that's, I think, one of the reasons why it struck me is because I'm constantly balancing. I mean, I think what he's talking about is humility, and everybody having that feeds into respect, tolerance, and such. And so I think as I read that article, Tim, what really struck me was the part that said, "But we mustn't treat every wound," and I'm going to read this, so I'm not saying it incorrectly, "every obstacle as some cosmic outrage or mortal danger." And then it goes on to say, "We mustn't overstate our vulnerability and exaggerate our due. While grievance blows our concerns out of proportion, humility puts them in perspective. While grievances reduce the people with whom we disagree to character, humility acknowledges that we're every bit as complex as we are, with as much of a stake in creating a more perfect union." And, as I mentioned, as a mom, I struggle constantly with validating especially with my 4-year-old, who's older, has big feelings, and my 2-year-old has big feelings too, of course, but she cannot communicate them as much as he can. And with him, I tried to strike the balance of I want to acknowledge his feelings. I want him to know that it's important, right? These obstacles that he sees in his life and such every day, but that we also need to think about everybody else's as well. So I think that's where the idea of humility that we feel as we feel, and the obstacles that we see may seem insurmountable and so large, but think about the other person's perspective as well, or the other side's perspective as well, where it may, and they have every right to feel the way they feel as you do. Everybody has the right to feel their feelings, and they might have a very different perspective than you do because based on their life experiences. And so to me, it really struck me because I am trying to figure out how to convey that to my kids. How do you strike? How do you stand up for what you believe in and how you feel, but also respect someone else's with humility? And I think, as I read this article, it really reminded me of one of the reasons I love New York City so much. That when I first came to work here as a 20-something-year-old at Columbia, I, due to religious reasons, I don't drink. And that, as a 20-something-year-old, is a pretty big part of what you're doing often in your 20s.
Same with me. I don't drink for religious reasons either.
And that was not a concern. Like, as soon as I just said that to people respected it. And I just love the fact that, in New York particularly, and that was my first experience with it. And so that's why I think it sticks with me so much. And I think it's also true of other places I've lived in, of course, as well, but that you can be different and as long as you respect other people's differences and their choices, that you can tolerate. Like, it doesn't have to be that someone else could be. I have friends that drink, obviously, and such, but that doesn't negate us from being friends and understanding each other in different ways. And that's just one example, but obviously we're all very different, right? And I think coming from Pakistan, I felt pretty different growing up and always wanted to assimilate. And I think that when I first started at Columbia gave me such confidence to feel that my difference was actually really something that people respected, that they enjoyed about me, not necessarily just the similarities. And so I loved reading that article. Thank you for sharing that. I actually share that with my husband as well
Nice.
to read through. But it just really brought me back to the best parts of my experience as a young woman in New York.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. And thank you for reading, the other part of it that spoke to you and relating it to your own experience. That was really rich to hear that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Tim. It was a really great article. I feel like there's just never enough time to read all the amazing things that are written out there. And so it's nice when I'm directed to something that otherwise I wouldn't necessarily have been able to read myself.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, to relate it, my wife and I have 4 kids. And so, I'm with you. Our kids are older, but that I think teaching your own children that, yes, their opinions, their feelings are valid, but so are other people's. And especially when situations get more complex as they get older, it's a real challenge, but it's also just an amazing opportunity for them to grow and for you to grow in terms of how do I support someone I deeply love, but also point out that just because I'm your parent, I will root for you, but I may not always see,
I don't always agree with them necessarily. And I mean, at 4, they're not always, their perspective is so different at times. What I hear from him and what I hear from his teacher are very different. And I'm like, okay. So it's like, I trust your teacher. That's why I sent you there. So I feel like she has a different perspective, and maybe let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah.
And that's not how I grew up, right, Tim? So it's a very different challenge. And I think, you know, in my parents' era, where obstacles is like, just you have to just deal with it, you have to get over it, and that's it. Not necessarily even that's going to make you a better person. I think that's what who made me who I am today, because I had to struggle.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
My dad died when I was 13.
Wow.
And we weren't necessarily, you know, very economically stable when I was young and such. And I credit education. And I think I didn't even put this part in, but really that's why I fundraise, is because I fundraise for higher ed to begin with, because I think that's really who made me who I am, what made me who I am today.
Yeah.
Not just that it gave me opportunities that I wouldn't have had otherwise, but also broadened my mind. And I think even beyond the economic mobility that education and higher education brings, I think is the really learning everybody's different experiences.
Yeah.
That's really amazing.
It is. Beautifully said. Thank you for sharing all of that, Ambareen.
Oh, thank you, Tim,
Yeah.
for giving me the opportunity.
Oh, my pleasure. It's been a real delight talking with you, learning from you today. And, you know, we had never even heard each other's voices until about a month ago. It's been such a fascinating conversation. Thank you, Ambareen, for preparation for this and for sharing your thoughts. Yeah.
I know that this must not be easy to do every week, and yeah, it's a lot of work, I know.
Yeah.
So I appreciate your preparation as well. That helps me. I'm definitely one of those people that likes that. So.
My pleasure. And congratulations on being part of RAND,
Thank you.
As you have all worked together to reach and surpass your campaign goal. That's
we have an amazing team. Oh my gosh, our leader, our fearless leader, VP of development, Christine Lanoy Newman, Vice President George Chuma, and Charlie Tower, who I work with, who's my counterpart in the DC. All great people, amazing, and so many others that I can't even name all of them.
Sure.
That obviously come into play. Our advanced services teams that are so helpful to us. Our prospect management research that your Carrie is amazing. Yeah. I have to say, I love the people that I work with at RAND. They make it a fun experience.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I can just tell from your smile that that's a genuine sentiment too. And that's so great to be in an institution that is, you know, striving to support big goals, but you've got great people, you know, dedicated and surrounding you. And it sounds like a great team of individuals too, not just professionals. So
yes, exactly.
That's terrific. Well, I wish you continued success, Ambareen.
Thank you so much, Tim. You too.
My pleasure. And thank you to our audience for your support when these interviews air on LinkedIn and YouTube and Spotify. You'll be able to find Ambareen Naqvi's conversation on LinkedIn, YouTube, Spotify, and Podbean in mid to late November of 2024. And until then, thank you all for listening in, watching in each week. And Ambareen, have a great rest of your day.
You too, Tim.
Thank you very much. We'll see you later.